Okay, now we are recording for our review session. Basically, what I want to share with people are a few things regarding studying for this course, because I know that things kind of can seem like they are a bit overwhelming and a bit much. So here's what I would want to share with you is something called a couple of study tips here. And for people who are doing well in the course, this is really not for you, okay? Because then you're okay. I mean, if you're pulling like 80% or above, you're doing well, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But this is really meant for people who say, I study like crazy, but when I take the tests, I can't do them very well. And I'll just read this to you, because a lot of people think they go into a test knowing the material, but that they go blank when they have a quiz or an exam. Sometimes they don't really read the questions well enough either. But when most people study, they read the notes, PowerPoint, slides, or textbooks. They may read, and while they read, look what's highlighted here. They feel, they know, they understand. That, however, does not mean they know it well enough to remember it for a test. They enter a test situation expecting themselves to know the material and find themselves going blank when trying to answer a test item. Now, here's why that happens, okay? When you take a test, you have to recall the information from memory and the notes ain't there. The trick is to make sure that you not only understand when you're reading the text, but also that you remember the material. So it requires you to know the notes you've been given. And the notes that I give are very dense, but they are like cheat sheets. Look at them carefully and see how they are divided into sections. Like eating a meal, you have to digest each section bit by bit. You can learn the material well enough to remember it without looking at the notes. For example, in this course, frequency is 1 over the period. Period is 1 over the frequency. Wavelength is speed of sound over the frequency. Frequency is speed of sound over the wavelength. Those kind of formulas, memorize them. Just memorize them. Because if you memorize the formulas, then when you got the questions on the test, you can just look at the numbers and push them in. Get your calculator out, do the division. Bob's your uncle. There's the answer. And I'm serious. You need to learn the material well enough to remember it without looking at your notes. You'll need to remember the main concepts outlined so you can rapidly answer questions in the test setting. So basically, 95% of your course material is in those notes that I give you. 95% of it is. In a way, those are your cheat sheets, really. Key strategies, check to see how well you remember the notes after you looked at them. And here, number 2, study a piece at a time. Just a piece at a time. You don't eat your whole plate in one fell swoop. You eat it in forkfuls. Okay? And then look at it well enough to pass that section immediately after studying it. Test yourself to see if you get it. Okay? At the end of each section. And write in your own notes. And outline it, just scribble in those darn notes that are sitting there. So now I will stop sharing right here. So basically I will say, more than half, I'd say 75% of the final will likely be on questions on units after the midterm. Most of the material will take place in the stuff that you covered after your midterm. But 25% will be from course material that was before the midterm. So you'll have some questions on frequency, wavelength, period, speed of sound, and those are all in Unit 1. So if you got a pen in your hand, jot that down. Unit 1, no frequency, period, no frequency, wavelength. Okay, those two, both of those. Okay, as the period gets longer, the frequency goes down. As the wavelength gets longer, the frequency goes down. Okay? They are inversely related. And then to find out what the wavelength is in a sound, how long is it? Okay, how long is a 250 hertz tone? How long is a 500 hertz tone? Wavelength is speed of sound over frequency. And the formula is much like 5 is equal to 10 over 2. 2 is equal to 10 over 5. You're just flipping things around. So wavelength, speed of sound over frequency. Frequency, speed of sound over wavelength. Bob's your uncle. There you go. There's unit 1. Okay? Hammer those concepts down. Just make it your business to memorize them. I'm not going to ask the Doppler effect. You might see a question of Mach 1. I don't know. That's the speed of sound. You should know that a reverberation versus an echo, you should know what that means. You know, what are those things? Okay? Unit 2 is the decibel from hell. Okay? And I'm not going to go all into power or everything. I'll stick mainly to pressure. But memorize certain things. And one is, what is 0 dB SPL? What is that? Okay? You need to know. As I've probably said 1,000 times, it's the softest it takes for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Okay, there's 3 conditions. The frequency is 1,000 hertz, the distance is 1 meter, and the listening condition, 2 ears. Okay, so they figured out, okay, what's the softest pressure against the eardrum to hear that? And that softest pressure was 0.0002, not 4 zeros, not 2 zeros, 3. 0.002 dynes per centimeter squared. That was the pressure against the eardrum to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. And they call that pressure 0 dB SPL, 0 decibel sound pressure level. And every time you increase the pressure by a factor of 10, you go up 20 dB. Every time. And that's where I showed you that picture in PowerPoint. And I may just show that picture again here so that you really make sure you know that picture. So we'll just go to share screen here. I'll minimize that. And we'll look at the decibel here. I'll pull up that particular PowerPoint slide. And we'll wait for this thing to pull up here. And okay, here we go. It's circling, it's saying have patience. Okay. So if we move from slide to slide here, there you go. There's that picture, that all-important picture. And no, don't sit there memorizing it. That's ridiculous. But you can figure it out. Look at the bottom left corner. Dynes per centimeter squared, they called that 0 dB SPL. And every time you increased the pressure by a factor of 10, you went up by 20. And you increase it by a factor of 100, you went up by 40. So that's basically the reason they did that, is because the range of pressure is so huge between barely heard and too loud. That range of pressure, look at the horizontal axis. This is 1,000,000. 200 is 1,000,000 times as much as 0.0002. Can't sit there dealing with 1,000,000 pressure increments between the softest you can hear and the loudest you can tolerate. So what they did was they made the decibel based on logarithms. And that's why we say when you increase the pressure by 10, you go up by 20 dB. Increase it by 10 again, now you're at 40. Increase it by 1,000-fold, now you're at 60. So they've managed this way so that the horizontal axis here and the vertical axis, look at that, they're the very same length. Exactly the same length. Okay? They represent the same range. But when you're talking about 120 decibel sound pressure level, please realize that that is 1,000,000 times, it represents 1,000,000 times the pressure of 0. Okay, but now we can deal with 0 to 120 because that can be done on an audiogram. Great. You know, I'd much rather deal with 120 increments than 1,000,000 increments if I'm testing someone's hearing. That's the issue behind Unit 2. And another issue in Unit 2 is memorizing the idea of adding or increasing pressure of sound and decreasing pressure of sound. So follow me here. I'll just say it. I'll stop sharing for a second. And maybe I'll just go into the notes here, see if I can pull up the notes. Just underscore certain things to look at that you never forget, okay? Don't worry so much about power. We really don't care. I'm scrolling down here. All this nerd stuff. Don't worry about all of this stuff right here. Yeah, really, whoops, over here especially. This stuff here, don't worry about it. Nobody cares, okay? Moving down over to here. Moving down over to here and here. And I'm going to highlight. Okay. Due to logarithms, if you double the SPL, you don't get 40. Okay? If you take 1,000 hertz tone and it's at 20 dB SPL, and you add another 1,000 hertz tone and it's at 20 dB SPL, the sum total is 26. Okay? If you double the sound pressure, you go up by 6 dB. But if the two tones are not the same, okay, you go up by 3. You go up by 3. So that's what it says here. In real life, however, you're not normally adding tones together of equal frequency and phase. There may be different. So you might have a machine in a room and it's making 90 dB SPL. And you have another different machine in the room and it's making 90 dB SPL. So the sum total there isn't 96, it's 93. Why? Because they're different. They're the same in intensity, but they're different in frequency. Okay, so memorize that. Just memorize it. Okay, and now let's look at what would happen in a choir. What happens when people, what about people and stuff and things? Forget about 2, or you can even think of 2. Let's pretend you have 2 Teds. I'm identical to my doppelganger Ted. If I'm talking at 70 dB SPL, and then another identical Ted is talking at 70 dB SPL, my sum total is 76 because I doubled the pressure, but the two sounds coming out were identical. But let's say if Ted's talking at 70 dB SPL, and then Karen's talking at 70 dB SPL, and we're standing side by side, what's the sum total then? It's 73 because we're different people, different frequencies. Okay? And the same thing goes with increasing by a factor of 10. If you had 10 Teds talking, one Ted is talking at 70, and 10 Teds now are talking at 70, how much do you go up by when you increase the pressure by a factor of 10? You go up 20. So now I'd be at 90. But if Ted is talking at 70, and then suddenly, instead of just Ted talking at 70, 10 different guys are talking at 70, okay? Then I'm not going up by 20 anymore. Now I'm going up by 10. Just like 3 was half of 6, 10 is half of 20. Okay? That's a fundamental thing out of Unit 2. The last thing out of Unit 2 that I would memorize, just make sure you have this, okay? The last thing is the difference between DB SPL and DB. And this deals with hearing aids. You're going to deal with this in hearing aids all the time. So just here, if you got a pen or pencil in your hand, be ready to scribble this down or look at your notes because it's right there too. DB SPL is always referenced to 0. It's always referenced to the ground. Okay? If you're going to say an apartment is twice as tall as a house, you need to know where the ground is. And we defined our ground as 0 dB SPL, the softest it took for a normal hearing human to hear that 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter with 2 ears. Okay, so that's our holy grail. That's our ground. That's our amen. Okay, that's our 10 commandments. Okay, that's your ground. Now, every sound that's related to that is also dB SPL, 20 dB SPL, 40 dB SPL, 39 dB SPL, a whisper, 50 dB SPL, average speech, 65 dB SPL, yelling, 80 dB SPL, a lawnmower, 110. All those are absolute values because they're related to the ground. But a relative value is simply dB. Okay? And here's what I mean by that. If I have 20 dB SPL, well, let's take our two machines, okay? 90 dB SPL. And then your other machine making 90 dB SPL. You put them together, what's the sum total? 93, right? Because they're different. So how much did you go up by? 3. Okay? That value is relative. Okay? Or if you had two identical machines making 90, put them together, now you're at 96. How much did you go up by? 6. Okay, that value is relative. Think about it in terms of time. If you're in Pacific Standard Time where I am, it's 9:30, quarter to 10. Okay, that's my absolute time value. Karen's in Maryland, so she's 3 hours ahead of me. So it's quarter to 1 by her. Okay, so there you go. That's her absolute time value. She's on Eastern Standard Time. But now take the term 2 hours. I can add 2 hours to 9:30, and now it's 11:30. I can add 2 hours to 8 o'clock, and now it's 10 o'clock. That 2 hours is relative. Okay? So when you take time, if it's 4 p.m., that's absolute. If you want a relative time value, an hour, 15 minutes. And here's the trick now with hearing aids. Let's take it home. All right? So absolute values are dB SPL, relative values are dB. In terms of time, it's 10 o'clock a.m., 12 p.m., whatever. And relative time value would be an hour, 15 minutes. You can add an absolute and a relative together, like 1 plus 2 is 3. Because if it's quarter to 10 my time and I add 2 hours to that, it's quarter to 12. See, I could add like 1 plus 2 is 3. And that's why we need to know this for hearing aids. Because with hearing aids, there's 3 things. Look at my fingers. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Input to the hearing aid. Sound coming into the mic. That's dB SPL. It might be a whisper, it might be conversational speech, it might be a fan, could be an air conditioner, okay? The second thing, here, now I'm flipping you the bird, okay, is the gain, what the hearing aid is giving, how much the hearing aid is amplifying, and that's relative, okay? That's dB. And the third thing that's coming out is what's coming out of the hearing aid. So input plus gain is output. And output is what's hitting your eardrum. Okay, so input, absolute value, dB SPL. Gain, relative value, dB. Output, absolute value, dB SPL. Okay, so input plus gain is output. And you can, C-A-N, can add those like 1 plus 2 is 3. You can't add 2 absolute values together like that, because 90 and 90 might be 96 if it's identical, or 90 and 90 is 93 if they're not identical. So those aren't added like 1 plus 2, okay? That finishes Unit 2. Okay? Hammer those concepts down. Make sure you internalize those. Unit 3. Complex sounds. Complex sounds. You need to know the difference. When you go into that unit, look at your notes there and put a star for the term periodic and aperiodic. Because periodic means the sound repeats over time. The sound wave, the bumps, you can see them. There's a pattern. Aperiodic means you can look at the sound wave and it looks like a cat scratch on the back garage door. Okay? Aperiodic is noise. Periodic sounds tonal. And what are complex sounds? Many frequencies together. Many frequencies together. And almost all sounds in the world are many frequencies together. You never listen to tones unless you're in a hearing test. Okay? Nobody listens to pure tones. Those exist in your audiometer and are put to you through headphones. We listen to speech. We listen to fans, air conditioners, traffic, background noise, God knows what. We're always hearing complex sounds. So let's talk about complex sounds. So the many different frequencies together. And if you're looking at a complex sound and you can still see it may look a bit ragged, but there's a bit of a pattern to it, you know, K-N-O-W, you know, okay, that it's going to sound somewhat tonal. It might be, see, there's a mix. You can still hear tonality in my voice. If it's shh, there's no tone. It's just noise. Shh. Noise. The transient noise. Okay, a door slam. Pop goes the weasel. Okay. Any sound that's is transient. Sounds that are continuous are turbulent. So the terms transient, turbulent, memorize them. Okay? Why am I talking like this? Because of speech. Speech is a combination of tonality and noise. It's a combination of periodic and non-periodic. Okay? So, what's the periodic elements? What's the tonal elements of speech? The vowels. Vowels. Okay? And give me the noise parts of speech, the consonants. Okay? P. Let's just now share and go to a particular set of notes, and I would ask that you look at this fairly carefully too. It's just important to have it down. So let's go to complex sounds and look at our notes here. Pull that up in Unit 3. Oh yeah, here we go. Up a little bit. There you go. Look at that table there. I'll make it a little larger so you can see it better. There you go. Speech as a complex sound. Put a star by this section. Make sure you know this. Okay, look at it. You got your vowels, A, E, I, O, U. Then you have your consonants, voiced, and then you have your unvoiced. Look at the three categories, three things. Okay? Voiced, look at the unvoiced on the far right. They are, look what it says underneath them. Non-periodic, means they're noise. Okay? They're high frequency. Look what it says, and you should jot down in your notes underneath that as well. They're soft. They're soft. They're not very loud. Okay, the letter T, the letter S, the letter P, the letter CH, not very loud. Compare that to the sounds under vowels. A, U, E, O, I, A. Okay, all those are louder and lower. They're also periodic. They're tonal. And now look at the middle column. That's a mixture. Those sounds are both tonal and noise. So if you take the letter F on the far right and you put a voice in it, you got a V. And if you take the letter S and you put a voice in it, you got a Z. And that's what speech is. As a complex sound, it's a combination of tonality, pops, and fizzes. And what I'm doing is just describing literally the acoustics of speech. The acoustics of speech, not the meaning. No one gives a darn about that. It's the acoustics, because hearing aids don't have brains. Okay, they don't understand language. They're just processing sound. And the most important sound you want to process is speech, because that's what people want to hear. So if you're going to become an HIS, it behooves of us to have a grip of the acoustics of speech, because you're going to be describing it constantly. And when you look at, let's say, a PowerPoint slide to finish off that particular section there, if I go over to our PowerPoint slides on it, I think in the PowerPoint slides, we often show you what we call the spectrum of speech. First of all, of course, you can see that all these tones here are tonal. Pure tone is A, B is a pure tone, C is a pure tone, even so is D. It's a combo, it's ragged, but you can see tonality to it. You need to, if we go over to, all these are square waves, triangular waves, not going to ask any of that stuff. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's a waveform that's pure noise. Okay, can't see any pattern to it at all. All right. But what I was wanting to get to in terms of speech was a description of what the spectrum of speech looks like. Here you go. Okay, that's speech. Most energy is in the vowels, louder and lower, right where I'm circling. Here's the high-frequency consonants on the far right. See how they're softer in amplitude and they're higher in pitch. That's what I need people to take home, okay? And when you're talking about sounds like that, you should know the difference between white noise and pink noise. White noise and pink. White over here, the spectrum is flat. Pink noise has more energy in the lows, but less in the highs. So which broadband spectrum do you think represents speech the most? If you're looking at this looks more like pink noise than it does like white noise. And when you're doing hearing testing in audiometry, you will learn in audiometry that the masking noise put into the good ear to keep it busy while testing a bad ear, if you're testing speech, you're going to use pink noise because it resembles the spectrum of speech. And one of the another important thing to remember out of Unit 3 is the concept of a quarter wave resonator. The quarter wave resonator. So put a star by this. Look at the bottom here. See, here's speech on a spectrum, vowels more intense. There you go. Look at all these. It's just telling you exactly what we talked about here, what I'm showing you in grayed out area here. Okay? Presbycusis, the most common hearing loss in the world, high frequency hearing loss. In the acoustics of speech, the vowels are louder than the consonants. With presbycusis, the audibility of consonants is compromised even more. Speech really begins to sound like a mumble. So the last thing, look at this area that I'm highlighting. Put a star by that puppy. It's the quarter wave resonator. The outer ear, the purpose of its shape, just like we will cover in anatomy, 120. This is a fusion concept. It's covered in both 110 and in 120 because it's so important to remember. Why? Because hearing aids plug up the outer ear canal. And when you plug up the outer ear canal, you've lost the quarter wave resonator. Well, what's a quarter wave resonator? It's a cylinder closed at one end, like a cup. Okay? Open at one, that's what your ear canal is. Closed at one end by the eardrum, open at the other end by the opening of your ear canal. So therefore, it's a quarter wave resonator. In English, that means it's going to resonate with sound waves 4 times its length. So if your ear canal is 2.5 centimeters long, it's going to resonate with sound waves 10 centimeters long. And what's 10 centimeters? 0.1 meter. So what frequency is it going to resonate with? Well, frequency is speed of sound over wavelength. Wavelength is speed of sound over frequency. We want to know the frequency. F equals 340 meters per second, because that's the speed of sound, divided by the wavelength, 0.1. And when you do the math, 340 divided by 0.1 is 3,400. So that would be the resonating frequency of your ear canal if it was a cup made out of ceramic or steel or glass. But your ear canal is made of flesh and bone. Therefore, that resonance gets spread. So memorize this, especially for anatomy. Okay? The outer ear canal resonance. I wonder if I have a picture of it even in this particular PowerPoint here. Not sure if I had included that or not. Whoa! Just want to get to it, see if we got it. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Yeah, here it is. There it is. Ear canal as a quarter wave resonator. No resonance for 125, no resonance for 250, none for 500, none for 1,000. Get to 1,500, it begins. 2,700 hertz is the peak resonance. 4,000 hertz, you still have resonance. And when you get above 4,000 hertz, you lose that resonance. And looky, look at this, look at the frequencies here. Between 1 and 4,000 hertz. That's the sweet spot of your hearing. Your outer ear is giving you that gift. How much? 20 decibels. You're getting a gift. And the reason why is because the high frequency consonants are soft. Use your high frequency consonants on an audiogram. They're very soft. Look, they're only about 20 dB. So your outer ear serves as a natural amplifier to lift those, to naturally lift them. Okay? So your outer ear was made for speech. Know in Unit 3 as well the concept of resonance. Make sure you have resonance down. Mass, stiffness, okay, all of that stuff. Mass resonates with lows, stiffness resonates with highs, that kind of stuff, okay? Because musical instruments, anything that carries sound has mass and stiffness. Mass and stiffness. So does my head, because it's transmitting sound. Sound's coming out of my voice, it's going out of my mouth. Guess what? My head has its own mass and stiffness. And if another guy is standing beside me and he's talking, it's not his voice that's so different, it's his head that's different. The mass and stiffness of his head is different than mine. So his head is going to resonate differently. That's why two different guys have different voices. It's not that the voice is so different, because the larynx is really quite similar from Bob to Tom to Ted. Okay? It's the heads that are different. Think of it like a clarinet compared to a trumpet, compared to an oboe, compared to a flute. You know, all the different instruments have mass and stiffness differences. So they are going to resonate differently. That's what makes them sound different. Okay? Half hour we've done. We're done pre-midterm. Now I will stop. Okay? Take a breath. Those are the concepts to make sure you have internalized for the final exam from the first half. The second half is more recent. So now I'll just ask, Karen, do you have any particular question from the second half of the course now? All kind of things from you that you might find that are kind of vague, or you don't really get them very well, or want some more explanation on. What are your perceptions here?
I can't think of any right now. Do you know what format the test is going to be in?
Yes.
Is it going to be like the midterm where we print it and
Very similar to the midterm. Similar format to the midterm, yep. You'll have some true falses. You'll have some multiple choices. I believe you'll have some fill in the blanks. You know, a couple of labeling diagrams. Yep, but they're almost always the same. Same with an anatomy. The exams that I create are almost always the same. Jen, I like to ask in different methods, different, what do you call it, modalities, instead of all multiple choice. So
we're going to be able to print it out, fill it out, and then send it back?
I believe so.
Okay.
The best person to ask that, though, is Lynn Royer. She knows that end of the course much better than I do. I'm more the content.
Okay.
But I believe you will be able to do that, I think.
All
but
right.
Don't trust me. I might lead you up the wrong path.
I just don't want to sit down on the last day and sit down to do it and realize it's 8 pages that I should have printed out and done before.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, anyone in the class listening to this recording, be sure to have that straightened out for yourselves before you do. Thanks for bringing that up, Karen.
Okay.
If we look now after the midterm, you're talking more recent. So this material's more fresh in your memory. Okay, so let's look at Unit 4. When you look at Unit 4, that had specific things in it too. I think I'll pull up the notes first to share screen. I'll pull up the notes here for Unit 4. Make that guy smaller, that one smaller. There you go. And I'll highlight for you the things that you really may want to make sure you know for this one. The most important one here, look at differential threshold. Now that relies a lot on, the main thing you want to look at is number 2 here. Okay, frequency. Frequency. The ability to detect tiny changes in frequency. This deals a lot with frequency resolution. The ability to detect differences in frequencies. Can you tell the difference between 1,000 hertz and 1,001 hertz? How big of a difference do you need to make for you to notice that there's a difference? Okay, they sometimes call that delta F. Sometimes it's called JND, just noticeable difference. But that's a differential threshold. It means how small was the change required for you to not, or how much of a change did I need to make in order for you to recognize that there was a change. Okay, so that one kind of pertains mostly to hearing loss. Sensory neural hearing loss, hair cell damage in the inner ear, the most common hearing loss in the world, presbycusis, okay? Any hearing loss that's sensory neural is going to have reduced frequency resolution. They're going to need a bigger change in frequency in order for the person to recognize that there is a change. Okay, they haven't got as good a frequency resolution anymore. It's because of the hair cell damage. So we'll scroll down now and look at the term absolute threshold. You need to know what that is because that's what you're doing when you're doing a hearing test. That's different from differential threshold. Absolute threshold is, did you hear it or did you not? Okay, did you hear it? Not how big was a change did I need to make for you to notice the change. No, did you hear it or did you not? The softest level for a person to report that he or she heard a tone. This is what we do in routine audiometry. And the word for threshold is the Greek letter theta. That's just a circle with a line going through. That's all it is. So whenever you're listening to a tone, it gets really hard to hear because it gets very soft. So an important slide to really take home from here, I will pull it up in the PowerPoint notes. We'll pull this guy up here. Okay, not that slide. It's going to be the next slide. Here we go. So have a peek here. Let's say you got completely normal hearing. Let's say you can hear all the way down to 0 decibels. So if a tone, look what it says in yellow here, if a tone is presented at 50 and you've got normal hearing, every time the tone is present, you're going to say, yep, And every time the tone is absent, you're going to say nope. So all your answers are going to be true positives, true negatives. But if we go to the next slide here, if the tone is at 5 dB, now it's a harder task. Because you may be able to hear down to 0, but 5 isn't that much more than 0. So this is harder to hear. So sometimes when the tone is present, you're going to say, yep, so that's a true positive. Sometimes when the tone is absent, you're going to say, nope, I don't hear it. That's a true negative. But sometimes when the tone is absent, you're going to say, yep, because you thought you heard it, but you didn't. False positive. And sometimes when the tone is present, you may not be able to hear that. You might have swallowed during the presentation of the tone. You might have burped during the presentation of the tone. It's hard to hear, okay? So the tone was there just like it was earlier, but this time you didn't hear it. So that's a false negative. Now, people come to hearing tests with biases, okay? They come to hearing tests with biases. So let's put a star right here. There's what we talked about in those 4 boxes, okay? So there's what we talked about in those 4 boxes. Now, when we talk about soft listening levels, here is where bias enters the picture. Bias comes in because you might have a person like Herb, or you might have a person like Mrs. McGillicuddy. Both of them may have the same hearing loss, but one might be biased toward false negatives, and one might be biased toward false positives. What does that mean? That means this. Herb, as just a guy I made up, okay, he might be a farmer, and he doesn't want to be in the hearing test anyway. His wife dragged him in, and he doesn't want to be anyone's fool. He wants to only answer when he's positive that he hears the tone, when he's absolutely sure. So he's going to be biased toward false negatives. The tone might be present at a very soft level, and he might be able to hear it, but he's not sure if he's totally sure if he does hear it, so he doesn't raise his hand. He raises his hand when the tone is a little bit louder, so he can be sure that he hears it. So his bias is toward false negatives. Okay? So even if he thinks he might hear it, he's not going to answer it yet. He's not going to put his hand up. He's not going to push the button. He's going to wait until you make the tone a little bit louder, and then he's going to be, because he's sure. So his bias is toward false negatives, so his hearing test is going to look worse than it really should. And Mrs. McGillicuddy, the retired first grade school teacher, she's the opposite. Her bias is toward false positives. She likes the test. She used to give tests. Okay, she likes to take the test. She thinks they're cool. So she's guessing. She's the Las Vegas gambler. She's raising her hand and you haven't even pressed the button. She's raising her hand when she imagines she's hearing a tone. Her bias is toward false positives. So if you're not a good clinician, you're going to end up with a test that looks better than it really is. Okay, so people come to hearing tests with biases. And that's what I mean, okay? That's the art of testing hearing. So when you think about the boxes here, this is what happens in a hearing test. And look at the slide carefully, because let's say the guy has hearing loss at 50 dB and the tone is presented at 55. Look at the yellow here, okay? Okay, look what I'm highlighting here. Pretend you have a 50 decibel hearing loss and I'm presenting a tone at 55. Okay, that's hard to hear. And you may hear it, but if you're Herb, you're not going to raise your hand until it's 60. If you're Mrs. McGillicuddy, you might be putting up a hand and you didn't even push a button on your audiometer yet. You hadn't even presented the tone. So that's the main thing from Unit 4 that we're looking at here. So then the next thing in Unit 4, you need to put a star by method of limits. because that's how we test hearing. And remember the two things under method of limits, okay? The clinician adjusts the tone, the client responds. The second thing is the tone is adjusted in fixed increments. We don't test 43 dB, okay? We test 40 or 45 or 50 or 55 or 60. We test in 5 dB increments. And the way we do the method of limits is we use the Hewson-Westlake approach. That's what's number 3 here. We go down by 10, and when the person doesn't hear it, we go up by 5. So if the person hears a 60 dB tone, we go down to 50. If a person hears a 50 dB tone, we go down to 40. If the person doesn't hear it, we go up to 45. If he heard it, we go down to 35. He doesn't hear it, we go up to 40. He doesn't hear it, we go up to 45. He hears it, you're done. 2 ascending levels or responses at the same dB level is called threshold. Then you test the next frequency. Same procedure. Then you test the next one. Same procedure. Hewson-Westlake approach. Ascending, descending approach. They use both because if I was using a descending approach, you know what you're listening for. If I was only using an ascending approach, your thresholds would be worse because you don't know what you're listening for. So the Hewson-Westlake approach, number 3, is a combination of both of those approaches. The next thing we need to know in Unit 4 is MAF and MAP. This is huge, okay? Huge concept. So we'll look at MAF a second here. Go to the slide with minimal audible field. MAF. There you go. Remember the thing earlier on? In Unit 2, what's the softest level it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears? Well, we called that 0 DB SPL. So look what we've drawn here on this PowerPoint slide. 1,000, and look where the line goes over to the left. We call that 0 DB SPL. Now here's the thing to take home, because this is step number 2, okay? Step number 1 is this. Slide number 15. We better remember this slide? Okay, so that's number 1. I've highlighted the stuff in yellow. That's the ground. If you played that same game with other frequencies. So now 1,000 we've defined. Because of this, we've defined that pressure as 0 dB SPL. So going to this slide here, 1,000 hertz, 0 dB SPL. If we played the same game with the other frequencies, let's play a 500 hertz tone from a speaker at 1 meter distance. How much decibels was required for that person to hear 500? And 250 from a speaker at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. And 125 at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Look at how it required more decibels. Okay? And so what you end up with is a curve. And look at the sweet spot of our hearing due to the outer ear canal resonance that we described earlier. MAF means the softest level, look what it says in white here, required to just barely hear all, circle the word all the different frequencies at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. And you end up with a smile, a curve. Okay, so that's step number 2. Step number 3 is MAP. What's the softest it took to hear all the different tones, but this time with 1 ear under a headphone? Because this is now step 3. I'll tell you why we're doing this, okay? Step 3. And notice that 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. Notice how the yellow curve is about 5 decibels below the white curve. And that means the softest level required to just barely hear all the different frequencies with 1 ear under a headphone, okay, requires a little bit more decibels. And look at the bump here. You have a bump. And the reason you have a bump is because you've plugged up the ear with a headphone. You've lost some of the outer ear canal resonance. It's no longer a quarter wave resonator. Nonetheless, the point to make here is this MAP compared to MAF. And we do MAP for a reason. And the reason we do MAP is to come up with, whoops, this. There's step number 4. Okay, MAP, that white curve, is 0 dB HL. So now look at the audiogram. This is the human hearing test. This is the graph upon which hearing thresholds are placed. And look at the 0 line right there, that guy that I'm highlighting. That 0 line is this curve here. MAP. Those are identical. Okay? We do hearing tests with 1 ear under a headphone. But I don't want all different frequencies sitting. I don't want to have to deal with different. I want different frequencies. I don't want all different intensities. Look at how that white curve is all over the place. Here it's at 40. Here it's at 25. Here it's at 10. Only here now, does it ever touch 0? Barely. Okay, and then there's a bump, and then it goes down, and then it goes up. I don't want all those differences called normal hearing under a headphone. I'd much rather call all those differences 0. Okay, right there. But please remember that white line, that line, look where I'm circling, right here with my cursor, right there. That amount right there actually is about 40. Okay, now let's look at 250. 25. Actually, this represents 25 dB SPL. This represents 40 dB SPL. This represents about 12. This represents about 7. This represents about 3. Okay, this represents about 4. This represents about 15. Don't memorize the numbers I'm saying. Just memorize the fact that MAP is IS, capital letters, bold-faced, underline, is 0 dB HL. Okay, so in your notes, where we talked about MAP, you got different dB references, DB SPL and DB HL. And we got there with the 4 different steps that I just outlined. The softest it took to hear 1,000 hertz at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Step 1. Step 2, the softest it took to hear all the different frequencies at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Step 3, the softest it took to hear all the different frequencies with 1 ear under a headphone. And step 4, let's call that MAP 0 dB HL. There's your, now that's the ground for human hearing. Okay, not just the ground for sound, it's the ground for human hearing. And then when you look at number 3, that's the reference for you as a human, or me as a human. If I've got a 50 decibel hearing loss and someone presents a 60 dB tone, I hear it at a sensation level of 10, because 60 is 10 more than 50. If my hearing loss is 10 dB and someone presents to me a 60 dB tone, I hear it at a sensation level of 50 because 60 is 50 more than my threshold of 10. So think of SPL as the reference for the world, for machines, for hearing aids, for the whole world. And DBHL is the reference for the human race. And DBSL is the reference for you. Okay? That's Unit 4. Unit 5 was loudness and pitch. And we're coming to more recent memory now. Loudness and pitch. When you're dealing with loudness, we deal with something called phons. Loudness is the psychoacoustic correlate to intensity. Pitch is the psychoacoustic correlate to frequency. So there's two main things to look at in that particular unit. I'll share here, and let's pull up some of the stuff from that. Loudness and pitch. Let's pull that up. Here you go. Phons. Okay? So basically, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint too. Look at the bottom curve first. And I'll pull up the PowerPoint so we can see that. Here goes. All right. So remember this guy? He came from Unit 4. Okay? That would be called 0 phons. Okay, so let's look at this so we understand what we mean. Look at all the frequencies along that yellow curve. All of the frequencies are just barely audible. So they're heard equally loud. How loud? Question mark. Just barely audible. That's how loud. Remember what MAF is. The softest it took to just barely hear all the different frequencies with 2 ears at 1 meter distance from a speaker. Okay? And you can see that 1,000 here is still at 0, but when we played 250 and we played 500, yep, there's very different DB SPLs required to just barely hear all the frequencies, right? We covered that in Unit 4. Okay, so Unit 5 is just turning here and looking at it from a different angle. It's saying, hey, okay, every frequency along that yellow curve is just barely audible. So all the frequencies along that yellow curve are heard equally loud. Equally loud. How loud? Just barely audible. That's how loud. They're all at threshold. So we call that 0 phons. Here's the picture, 0 phons. That curve is MAF. Same thing. Okay? So now let's crank up the intensity. Let's go to this one. Let's turn the 1,000 hertz tone up to 40 dB SPL. Look where my cursor is, right here. So 1,000 hertz is turned up to 40 dB SPL. See that? Okay. So you hear that. How loud is it? I don't know, pretty soft, but you hear it. Okay. So then I say to you, okay, memorize how loud that sounded. Now I'm going to play a 500 hertz tone. Tell me when that sounds just as loud as this one did over here. And you say, when I get to about this level, you say, yep, that sounds about the same in loudness. Okay. Then I turn up a 250 hertz tone. Look where my cursor is here. And I ask you, and I turn it up, and you tell me, okay, now it sounds just as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did. And then I play at 100 hertz, and I find I have to turn it up to about 60 for you to say, yep, that sounds just about as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did over here. So here your anchor is the 1,000 hertz tone at 40, and you're comparing all other frequencies to when they sound equally loud to the 1,000 hertz tone at 40. Just like we did at the bottom here. 1,000 hertz, that was barely audible. How much did we need to turn 250 up to be just barely audible? How much did we need to turn 100 up to be just barely audible? So every frequency on the bottom curve is heard equally loud. How loud? Just barely audible. And how loud is this curve? Okay. every frequency on the middle curve is heard equally loud as well. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone was at 40. That's how loud. So that's called 40 fons. Now let's crank up 1,000 hertz to 120. Yikes. And now we play the same game. I play other frequencies until you say, yep, they sound equally loud to the 1,000 hertz tone at 120. And notice that this whole top curve is now called 120 fons. All frequencies along it are heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 120. Notice how the lines flatten out. Notice how the curves flatten out. Okay? They flatten out because, and I don't know why they do, they just do, but call the decibel distance between the top and the bottom your football field. That's your gridiron. That's your playing field of hearing. And you got a smaller dynamic range in the lows than you do in the highs. Dynamic range, D-Y-N-A-M-I-C. Dynamic range is the decibel distance between the softest it took for you to hear and the loudest you could tolerate. And notice that that decibel distance is smaller for the lows than it is for the mids and highs. And by the way, this is why ghetto blasters have a bass boost on them. That's why radios and stereos have a bass boost, a loudness switch. We need more energies. At soft volumes, we need more bass energy to just barely hear. We're not benefiting from the resonances of the outer and middle ears. Why does that change with loud sounds? I don't know, but it just does. Okay? Then when you're looking at your notes here, the next thing to fathom is mells. Don't get too lost in mells. Oh yeah, sones. Oh, we'll look at that puppy for just a sec. Quick. Not much there, but sones. There. One sone is the loudness of 1,000 hertz tone at 40. Why do we have sones? To say if something's twice as loud as, or half as loud as. So if a fan is one sone, it's heard as loudly as 1,000 hertz tone at 40. What's ambient background room noise? About 40. The background ambient room noise is pretty soft. So an expensive fan will have a loudness of one sone. A cheap bathroom fan that you bought for 10 bucks at Lowe's hardware store, that might be 3 sones. It's heard 3 times as loud. Okay? It's a cheap fan. You get what you pay for. Okay, now we'll look at Mel's quick a sec here. Ooh, not that one. I want this guy here. Okay, and Mel's is just pitch. And all you need to know is that frequency and pitch, yep, they go together, but they're not perfect birds of a feather. They're not. If I look at this, okay, if I play 1,000 hertz and I ask you, okay, you hear that. Now, this isn't talking about loudness. So just pretend it's at 50 dB or whatever. Who cares? Yeah, playing 1,000 hertz. So you hear that pitch. And we're going to call that pitch 1,000 Mells. See, Mells is the pitch. Frequency is the frequency, number of cycles per second. So here's 1,000 hertz. You hear that. We're going to call that 1,000 Mells. Let's see if I play a tone and I say, you let me know when this sounds to you perceptually 2 times higher in frequency. 2 times higher. And I crank it up until, oh, look at this, 2,000 Mells. Now you said that sounds twice as high in frequency. Well, what frequency is it really? Gosh darn, I'm way more than 2 times 1,000. So they don't perfectly correspond. Okay, yes, of course, if I turn up the frequency, your pitch perception goes up. Yes, it does. Absolutely, like duh, D-U-H, exclamation mark. But it's not a one-to-one thing. That's the difference. Okay? That's the main thing to take home. Same here. If I turn 2,000 hertz, look at 2,000 hertz. How many mels is that? 1,500. So if I play a 2,000 hertz tone, does that sound twice as high in pitch? Follow my cursor. 2,000 hertz actually sounds to the normal human about 1.5 times as high in frequency. I didn't make it up. That's just what this stuff is. The same story told here. 2,000 hertz sounds like about 1,500 mels. That's all I mean to say by that. Okay, in the same unit here, carrying on. Place theory, temporal theory. You should know basically what those are. Don't memorize every little detail, but basically place theory is tonotopic. Temporal theory is a guy named Rutherford. This is how we code different frequencies. Case of the missing fundamental, you should put a star by that, and you should also put a star by periodicity pitch. Okay? These are two phenomena that are not well explained by the place theory. And the place theory is specific frequencies are represented in specific places in the cochlea. The base of the cochlea represents treble. The apex of the cochlea represents bass. That's the Helmholtz place theory. Traveling waves, all that stuff. Okay? The temporal theory says, no, here's how we tell what the pitch is. It's the number of times the eighth nerve fires per second. Okay? Well, that's kind of a weird theory. But these 2 points, number 1 and number 2, they are not well explained by the place theory. That's why the temporal theory still exists. I'll stop sharing here. Unit 6, upward spread of masking. Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. The rumbling of a truck covers the peeping of a canary better than the peeping of a canary covers the rumbling of a truck. Okay? That's because of the shape of the traveling wave. Lows mask highs better than high, and that has everything to do with hearing aids. Background noise is mostly low frequencies. The speech you want to hear is the high frequency consonants. So lows, due to the upward spread of masking, people have trouble in background noise. Okay, so this is a phenomenon that relates directly to your field. You're going to be counseling people every day about this. And you as a clinician are going to be knowing why this occurs. You're not explaining this to your clients, but you're a professional and you've had a 2-year college diploma, a degree. So you know why these things occur. Just like an optician knows why various things occur in the eye, although the person isn't going to be describing that to you. The person did go to school to learn about the eye. Okay, so you're learning about the ear. So unit 6, upward spread of masking, and it's because of the asymmetrical traveling wave that we'll look at in our next review in anatomy, 120. Enough on upward spread of masking. Unit 7, the last unit, is 3 non-electronic acoustic modifications in hearing aids. We spent 2 weeks on this one. Very recently, the main one to know is venting. Vents allow low frequencies to escape out of the ear canal. Why is this important? Due to the occlusion effect. Plug your ear. When you plug your ear and you talk, your own voice gets louder. Okay? And what gets louder in your voice when you plug your ear? The low frequencies. What gets louder when you plug your ear? The low frequencies, not the highs. Plug your ear and say S. Not much louder. Say M, much louder. Occlusion effect, that's the reason for vents. Vents increase the acoustic mass of air. because vents allow the air canal, the air in the air in the ear canal, the air in the ear canal can now communicate with the air outside because you got a hole in the hearing aid. So you've increased the acoustic mass, and the lows will follow that, like Hansel and Gretel followed the crumbs of bread to get out of the woods. Vents allow the lows to escape to get rid of the occlusion effect. And who needs vents? People with good low frequency hearing, because they're going to hear the occlusion effect. Big time. Huge. Okay. I'll stop this review, basically, because that stuff is more in recent memory. Most of the exam is on the second half of the course, but I spent half of this review on the first half, just to sharpen ourselves on that. As done. All right. Karen has patiently listened through the whole thing. Adios. I'll stop recording here and wish you all good luck on the final exam. Cheers. We'll see you later.
Thank you. See you in a bit.
Okay.